The snow had stopped sometime in the night, and the world outside my kitchen window was perfectly, painfully quiet. I sat at the table with both hands wrapped around my mug, watching the birch trees in the backyard stand white and still against the gray January sky. The furnace clicked on. The clock above the stove ticked. My tea went cold without me noticing. 63 years old. And I still hadn't learned how to stop planning things for people who didn't ask me to. My name is Dorothy. I live in a small brick house in Oakville, Ontario. The same house where I raised my 2 children, where my late husband Robert carved his initials into the basement door frame the year we moved in, where every corner still holds a version of someone I used to be. I retired 3 years ago after 31 years of teaching elementary school. I have a garden in the summer, a book club on Tuesday evenings, and a heart that, despite everything, still reaches toward the people I love with both hands open. That is the part that got me into trouble. It started the way most things start, with a good idea that felt like a gift. My daughter and her husband had been struggling. Not dramatically, not visibly, but I could see it the way only a mother can. In the tight line of her shoulders when she talked about money. In the way she changed the subject whenever her husband mentioned his job. They had 2 boys, 7 and 9, full of energy and noise and questions, and they hadn't had a real vacation in 4 years. My son-in-law worked in logistics. My daughter worked part-time at a dental office and was taking online courses in the evenings. They were doing everything right and still barely staying ahead of it. My son, meanwhile, lived in Calgary with his wife Renata and their daughter. He was doing well, had been for years. He called every few weeks, remembered birthdays, seemed, from a distance, like everything was fine. I had some money set aside, not a fortune, but enough. After Robert passed, I had received a small life insurance payout, and I had added to it quietly over the years, transferring a little each month into a separate account I called, in my head, the family fund. I never told anyone about it. It felt presumptuous to announce, but I always knew what it was for. In November, I made a decision. I would take the whole family to Tofino, British Columbia, for spring break. All of us, my daughter and her husband and the boys, my son and Renata and their daughter, and me. A full week in a rented house on the water, with the rainforest behind us and the Pacific in front. I had been to Tofino once, with Robert, in the early years of our marriage, and he had stood at the edge of the surf with his arms wide open, laughing like a man who had just discovered something important. I wanted the grandchildren to stand in that same water. I wanted to watch them. I spent 3 weeks planning. I found a house that slept 12, right on the beach, with a wood-burning fireplace and a wraparound deck, and a kitchen big enough for all of us to crowd into at once. I called the rental company and spoke to a woman named Sheila, who was patient and helpful and told me it was one of their finest properties. I put down a deposit of $2,000 on my visa. I researched flights from Toronto to Vancouver, and from Calgary to Vancouver, and car rentals, and ferry schedules, and the best spots to see the gray whales that come through in March and April. I made a folder on my laptop. I put everything in it. Confirmation numbers, packing suggestions, titre de table, a list of restaurants in Tofino that were good for families. I printed a copy, and kept it on my desk. Then I called my daughter. She cried. Not loudly, but I could hear it. The way her voice went thin and then full at the same time. She said she didn't know what to say. Her husband got on the phone and said thank you in a way that made me feel like maybe I had done something right. Then I called my son. He said it sounded wonderful. He said Renata would love it. He asked me to send him the dates and said he'd look into flights from Calgary. I told him I was already planning to cover everything, flights included. And he said, Mom, you don't have to do that. And I said I wanted to. And he said, Okay, thank you. And that was that. I booked the flights within the week. 6 tickets from Toronto, 3 from Calgary. I put them all on the same card. I remember sitting at this same kitchen table, watching the total climb, and feeling something I can only describe as warm certainty. This was what the money was for. This was always what it was for. I imagined my youngest grandson running into the surf for the first time. The cold shock of the Pacific. The way he'd scream and laugh at the same time. I imagined sitting on the deck in the evenings with a glass of wine, watching my daughter finally exhale. I imagined my son and his wife walking the beach at sunset. The way couples do when they've been given space and time and something beautiful to look at. I imagined being there. In the middle of all of it, that was the part I got wrong. The text came on a Wednesday afternoon in early February. I was in the living room, sorting through a box of old photographs I'd been meaning to organize for years. I had just found one of my son at maybe 4 years old, sitting in a plastic pool in the backyard, squinting into the sun, and I was smiling at it when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was from my son. Hey, Mum. So Renata and I have been talking, and we think it might work better if it's just the immediate families on this trip. Renata's sister might come, and with everything going on, she'd feel more comfortable keeping it smaller. No hard feelings. We really appreciate what you've put together. Let us know what you need from us. I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone face down on the table and looked at the photograph of my 4-year-old son in his little plastic pool for a long time. No hard feelings. I thought about the folder on my laptop. I thought about Sheila from the rental company and the $2,000 deposit. I thought about the 9 plane tickets I had purchased, 3 of which were for my son and his wife and their daughter. I thought about the phrase, "Let us know what you need from us." As though this were a work project and I were a coordinator they'd chosen not to include in the final presentation. I didn't call him. I didn't reply to the text. I went to the kitchen and made myself another cup of tea and stood at the window and watched the birds at the feeder in the backyard for a long time. I had learned something. In 63 years, crying in the moment never helped me think clearly. So I didn't cry. I just stood there, and I let the hurt sit beside me, the way you let a difficult guest sit at your table acknowledged, but not in charge. After a while, I picked up my phone and called my daughter. I didn't tell her about the text right away. I asked how the boys were, how her course was going, whether the older one had recovered from his cold. We talked for 20 minutes, like normal, and then, quietly, I told her. There was a long silence. "Mum," she finally said, "you paid for their flights." "I know," I said. "Does he understand that I assume so?" I said. Another silence. Then she said, "What are you going to do?" And I surprised myself. Because without any planning, without any drama, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I'm going to call the rental company, I said, and see if they can adjust the booking. My daughter was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Adjust it how?" "Downsize it." I said, "I don't need a house that sleeps 12 anymore." I could hear her processing this. Then she said, very carefully, "Are you sure?" "Yes." I said, "I'm sure." What I did not do was call my son and have a long emotional conversation about how his text had made me feel. I had done that before, years ago, with a different hurt. And it had ended with him feeling attacked and me feeling unheard, and both of us pretending for months afterward that everything was fine. I was too old for that now, and too tired. What I did instead was think. I thought about it for 2 days. I went to book club on Tuesday and listened to everyone argue about the novel we'd read and felt, for the first time in weeks, like myself. I went for a walk along the lake on Wednesday morning when the temperature climbed just above 0 and the ice at the edge was starting to soften. I thought about Robert, about what he would say. He had been a practical man. He would have said, "You can't give someone a trip and attach yourself to it." The gift and the giver aren't the same thing. But this wasn't about attachment. This was about being excluded from something I had built. There is a difference. On Thursday morning, I opened my laptop and I looked at the booking. All 9 plane tickets, the rental house, the total I had spent so far, and then I opened a new browser tab, and I looked up what it would cost to rebook the Calgary flights. Canadian Airlines have a rebooking policy I knew well from years of navigating school trips. There are change fees, and there are refund windows, and there are, if you know where to look, options. I called the airline. I was on hold for 40 minutes. And when a representative finally answered, I explained my situation calmly. I said there had been a change in travel plans, and I needed to cancel 3 of the tickets. There was a fee. I paid it without blinking. What remained after the cancellation went back onto my card. Then I called Sheila at the rental company. I explained that our group size had changed. She was sympathetic. She said the 12-person property was unfortunately non-refundable at this stage. But she had a 6-person property available for the same week, right on the same stretch of beach. And if I wanted to transfer the booking, the difference in price would be refunded to me within 5 to 7 business days. I said that sounded perfect. And then I made one more call. My friend Patricia has known me since we were both pregnant and sharing a prenatal class in 1988. She lives 20 minutes away in Burlington, and she has been widowed for longer than I have. And she laughs at things, the way people laugh when they've decided, consciously, that life is still worth finding funny. I called her and said, "Would you like to go to Tofino in April?" she said. "Dorothy, I've been waiting for you to do something ridiculous for years." "Yes?" I called 2 more friends. One said yes immediately. The other said she needed to check her calendar and called back within the hour to say yes. I didn't tell my son what I had done. Not right away. He texted me again 10 days later. He asked if I'd had a chance to think about the trip and whether I wanted him to buy his own flights or if I was going to rebook. He said Renata's sister was coming from Edmonton, and they were planning to do their own thing. I called him. He answered on the 2nd ring. Cheerful, unsuspecting. I said, I wanted to let you know that I've made some changes to the booking. He said. Oh yeah. What kind of changes? I said. I canceled your tickets and downsized the house. Your sister and her family and I will be going as originally planned, and I've invited a few friends to fill the extra space. There was a pause. Wait, he said. You canceled our tickets. Yes. I said. You indicated that you and Renata preferred a smaller group. I respected that. I also decided I preferred not to pay for flights for a trip you won't be joining me on. Another pause. Longer this time. Mum, he said, and his voice had shifted into something careful, something I recognized as the tone he used when he was trying to manage a situation. I didn't mean for you to cancel everything. I just thought it would be better if I know what you thought. I said, and I understand. But what you might not have fully considered is that I organized this trip, paid for this trip, and assumed I was a part of this trip. When that changed, the arrangements changed accordingly. He was quiet. Then he said, We were hoping maybe you could still cover the cost of the house. Since you'd already put down the deposit, I let that sit in the air between us for a moment. The deposit was for a 12-person house. I said, I don't have a 12-person house anymore. I have a 6-person house. And it's full? I heard him exhale. Is this about the money? He said. No, I said. It's about being told I won't be joining a trip I planned for my family. That's a different thing entirely. There was a long silence. I waited. I was good at waiting. 31 years of teaching had made me very comfortable with silence. Finally, he said, I didn't realize how this would come across. I said, I think that's true. And I hope, when you have some time to think about it, you'll understand why it landed the way it did. He said, I'm sorry. Mum, it was a small sorry. The kind that happens when someone is sorry for the outcome rather than the decision. I had learned, by 63, to tell the difference. I accepted it anyway, because accepting an imperfect apology is sometimes an act of mercy rather than weakness. Thank you, I said. I'll send you pictures from Tofino. We said goodbye. I hung up and sat for a while at the kitchen table, looking at the birch trees. The week we arrived in Tofino, it had been raining for 4 days straight. The way it rains on the west coast of Vancouver Island, not dramatically, just constantly, quietly, as though the sky had made a long-term commitment. The beach in front of our rental house was wide and gray and enormous, and the waves came in without asking permission. On the first morning, Patricia and I put on our rain jackets and walked to the water's edge before the others were awake. The cold came at us sideways. The mist sat low on the water. There was no one else on the beach in either direction. I stood there and thought about Robert standing in this same ocean 30 years ago, arms open, laughing. I thought about my grandson who would not be running into the surf this week, who would have to wait for another trip, maybe one he planned himself. I thought about my son in Calgary, going about his week. I thought about the folder on my laptop that I had eventually deleted, and the new one I had made, lighter and more manageable. I thought about how much of my life I had spent arranging things for other people to walk into. And then I thought about how the Pacific Ocean did not care about any of that. And somehow that was exactly the right thing to think. Patricia said, It's absolutely freezing. I said, I know. She said, I love it. I said. Me too. We ate salmon chowder that night from a restaurant in town. Huddled around the fireplace while the rain continued outside. My friend Carol had brought a bottle of good BC Pinot Gris. We played cards until midnight. Nobody needed anything from me. Nobody checked their phone waiting for me to solve something. I drank my wine and laughed at a joke Patricia told badly and looked at the fire and felt, quietly and without announcement. Like myself, there is a particular loneliness that comes from spending years as the person who holds everything together, the planner, the funder, the one who keeps the calendar and makes the reservations and remembers everyone's dietary restrictions and wants. More than anything, just to be included in the thing she has made possible. It is not a dramatic loneliness. It is the kind you carry so long you forget. It has a weight. Until the day you set it down and feel the difference in your shoulders. I had set it down somewhere between Oakville and the Pacific, and I was not in a hurry to pick it up again. On the fourth day, the rain stopped. We woke to something rare, actual sun, low and gold, coming in from the west over the water. We put on layers and walked the beach for 2 hours. We saw a gray whale surface about 100 meters offshore, slow and enormous and completely unconcerned with us. And we all stopped and watched until it was gone. My daughter texted me that afternoon. She had seen my photo on the group chat, the 4 of us on the deck with the water behind us, squinting into the unexpected sun. She sent me a string of heart emojis and then typed, "You look so happy." "Mum, I'm so glad you went." I typed back, "Me too." "Sweetheart, me too." My son texted me the same evening. He said the photo was beautiful. He said he hoped I was having a good time. I replied that I was, and that the salmon was excellent, and I asked how his daughter was doing. We texted back and forth for a few minutes, the way people do when they are finding their way back to something without naming it directly. It was tentative and a little careful, but it was there. Families are long. I have learned they are not a single moment or a single mistake. They are years and years of ordinary mornings and Sunday phone calls and misunderstandings and repairs. I did not stop loving my son because he had sent a text that broke my heart. I would not stop calling him or remembering his birthday or hoping from a distance that his life was going well. But I had learned something on this trip that I think I had always known and never quite let myself practice, that I was also a person, not just a mother, not just a grandmother, not just the one who organized things, a person who deserved to be in the room she had built, a person who, when excluded, was allowed to build a different room and fill it with people who were glad she was there. On the last morning, I woke early. The house was quiet. I made coffee in the big kitchen and took it out to the deck and sat in one of the Adirondack chairs while the sun came up over the trees behind the house, and the ocean turned from dark gray to silver to something I don't have a word. And 4. I thought about the folder on my laptop, the confirmation numbers, Sheila from the rental company, the 9 tickets that became 6. I thought about sitting at my kitchen table in January with my cold tea and my hurt, and the long, quiet road between that morning and this one. I had not fixed everything. My son and I still had things to say to each other that would take time to find the words for. The relationship between a mother and her adult child is never finished, never fully resolved. Just ongoing seasons and seasons of renegotiation. But I had come to the ocean anyway. I had brought my friends. I had eaten well, and laughed loudly, and stood in the cold Pacific air and felt, all the way to my bones, that I had not done anything wrong. The waves came in, one after the other, the way they always do. Indifferent and enormous and somehow comforting. I held my coffee with both hands and watched the light change on the water. And I did not wish for anything I didn't have. That was enough. That was, finally, enough.